He was not supposed to be the one who found him. Of the 4 cars tangled together on the final lap of the 2001 Daytona 500, Ken Schrader's was the closest. What he saw through that window has never fully left him. For 25 years, he gave interviews, sat for documentaries, and said almost nothing about those few seconds. He answered every question around the edges of it and none about the center. Fans filled in the silence with their own theories, and most of them were wrong. Now, at 71, after a quarter-century of carrying the weight alone, he has finally started talking. The cars came off turn 2 in a tight, ugly pack. Michael Waltrip and Dale Earnhardt Jr. had already broken away, running 1-2 untouchable, both driving cars owned by the man behind them. Waltrip had never won a race in over 460 career starts. This was finally going to be the day. Behind that lead pair, Ken Schrader, Dale Earnhardt, Sterling Marlin, and Rusty Wallace were fighting for position that barely mattered anymore. Schrader pushed to the outside, coming off the backstretch. He had raced beside Earnhardt enough times to know the move underneath never worked. Earnhardt made contact with Marlin's car first, low on the track, and his black Chevrolet shot up the banking toward the wall. Schrader, running the high line at exactly the wrong moment, could not get out of the way. His car caught Earnhardt's on the outside, and both slammed into the concrete barrier at full speed. From the broadcast booth, it barely registered. Compared to the violent wrecks Daytona had produced before, this looked survivable. Schrader climbed out of his own wreck first, uninjured, and instead of checking on himself, he ran straight for the black number 3 car sitting against the wall. He reached the window and looked inside. There was no movement, no sound. In a 2011 interview, Schrader admitted what he knew in that instant. Here's the deal. When I went up to the car, I knew he was dead. I didn't want to be the one who said Dale is dead. He turned and waved frantically toward the medical crew. He already knew. He just was not ready to say it out loud, not that day, and not for a very long time after. Schrader did not head to the interview pen. He went looking for one person, Michael Waltrip, the race winner and one of his closest friends. He found Waltrip mid-celebration, still soaked in the moment, and pulled him aside, away from the cameras. Mikey is one of my best friends, and I didn't want him to be blindsided, Schrader later explained. I went to Victory Lane and pulled him aside. I didn't say what I thought the final deal was going to be, but I told him to be ready for it, that it could be. Waltrip finished his winner's interview minutes later, with no idea how quickly the day was about to turn. Officials cut the session short and pulled him away before reporters could ask why. Schrader carried what he saw at that window into every interview for the next 2.5 decades. Reporters tried for years to get him to fill in the details. He always steered the conversation somewhere safer, back toward the racing, back toward the stats, anywhere but that window. Dale Earnhardt Jr. later acknowledged this burden, telling Schrader on a podcast, "You carry it for me. You carry it for Kelly, for Dad's family. You carry it for anyone who's ever cheered for him. It's a secret that you'll keep till your last breath. Kenny, I know you might sometimes wish you weren't the one, but I'm glad it was you." To understand why that silence went on so long, you have to go back to how 2 very different men from 2 very different places ended up closer than brothers. Schrader arrived in North Carolina in the 1980s chasing a Cup Series career, a driver from Missouri with no connection to the tight-knit racing families dominating the sport. Somehow, he and Earnhardt found each other fast anyway. They were building race shops within a few miles of each other near Mooresville at almost the same time, and the rivalry started before either building had a roof. Earnhardt bet Schrader his shop would be finished first. Schrader said his would beat it. On a Monday morning after a race at Bristol, Earnhardt showed up at Schrader's place early, expecting to win the bet, only to find Schrader already there working before sunrise. Earnhardt had to drive on gravel just to reach his own shop that morning. It became one of dozens of stories the 2 men carried for years, small and specific, the kind of detail that only survives between people who actually liked each other. That closeness extended past the racetrack in ways nobody outside their circle was watching. When Schrader built a pond on his property, Earnhardt promised to stock it with fish once construction was finished. When the pond was ready, Schrader called to collect. It wasn't a week later. They showed up, they were COD, but they showed up. He didn't quite take care of the fish like he said. He just ordered them. Schrader still brings up that detail as proof that even Earnhardt's generosity came with a catch. At a car show in Detroit, Schrader and Earnhardt both fell for the same impractical purchase. An amphicar, a strange little vehicle built to drive on pavement and float on water with a flip of a switch. They left the show and turned back because neither one could let it go. Earnhardt handed over a cash down payment. Schrader called his shop and had a check and a rollback truck sent up to collect it. Earnhardt laid down one condition. Schrader was not to put it in the water without him there to see it happen. Schrader ignored him almost immediately and launched it alone. Earnhardt found out and was furious, exactly as long as it took him to move on to the next argument. He never paid Schrader the rest of his half of the purchase. The friendship reached past both men, too. When Schrader's 10-year-old daughter joined the Earnhardt family on an extended trip aboard their yacht, she grew homesick. It was Earnhardt who pulled her onto his lap and talked her through it. She never forgot it. Neither did Schrader. That kind of closeness is exactly why the version of the final race that circulated for years never sat right with him. For 2 decades, one explanation for Earnhardt's final laps became accepted as fact. Earnhardt was running defense, holding back the pack so his son and his top driver could cruise to a 1-2 finish. Schrader says it is wrong. Waltrip and Earnhardt Jr. did not need protecting that day. Their cars were simply faster. Earnhardt was not blocking out of generosity toward his son. He was blocking because losing position, even to cars he owned, was never something Earnhardt accepted easily. Schrader was there for the decision that put him on the outside line in the first place. The group had tried the inside line against Earnhardt too many times before and knew from experience it never worked. That lesson is exactly what put Schrader closest to the wall when everything went wrong. The weeks after the crash turned into one of the most intense periods of change American racing had ever seen. Investigators picked apart every detail, from the concrete wall to the way Earnhardt's seatbelt had failed during impact. NASCAR's crash report, published in August 2001, stated, Dale Earnhardt's death was most likely caused by a blow to the back of the head, not from one single cause, but from a combination of unusual factors. These included the uncommon severity and trajectory of the car's impact with the wall, an immediately prior collision with Schrader's car that put him out of position, and a separation of the left lap belt under load that allowed greater motion within the car. A public fight broke out between the racing team and the belt's manufacturer. Independent reviews later found that Earnhardt had a long-standing habit of adjusting his belts for comfort in a way that may have quietly reduced how well they performed in a direct hit. He had also resisted newer head and neck safety devices for years, considering them a hindrance rather than a protection. Out of that report came sweeping changes, energy-absorbing walls installed at every major track, a completely redesigned safety chassis, and a head and neck restraint that became mandatory for every driver. Schrader watched all of it unfold from the inside, still racing every weekend, carrying a memory none of his rivals shared with him. Asked years later how strange the aftermath felt, he said nothing ever felt quite the same again after that day. In 2026, as the sport marked 25 years since that afternoon at Daytona with a new documentary and a wave of retrospectives, Schrader did something he had avoided for most of his adult life. He sat for extended interviews and spoke at length about the friendship, the shop, the amphicar, and finally, carefully, about the crash itself. He still has not described exactly what he saw through that window. That restraint appears deliberate. What he has offered instead is everything around it. The decision to warn Waltrip before anyone else could. The reason he does not believe the blocking story. The small domestic details of a friendship that had nothing to do with fame. Dale Earnhardt Jr. has publicly credited Schrader with something close to a second, quieter kind of parenting in the years since the crash, calling him family in every way that matters without the blood relation. One recent podcast tribute to Schrader ran long enough that it stopped sounding like a guest segment and started sounding like a thank you letter 25 years overdue. That bond says more about what Schrader carried than any single quote about the crash itself ever could. That may be the real shape of Schrader's 25-year silence. It was never about protecting a secret so shocking it could not be spoken aloud. It was about protecting a family and a legacy from having its most painful moment reduced to a single sentence on a highlight reel. He chose instead to let the friendship speak for the man. One gravel road, one stubborn fish delivery, one shared bad idea at a time. Letting the small stuff carry the weight the crash never should have to carry alone. If you had spent 2.5 decades holding back the hardest thing you ever witnessed, what would finally make you ready to say it out loud? Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. For more interesting stories like this, click on the next video that pops up on your screen. You never know what you'll discover next.